Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming to this impromptu talk by Arik. We are running right now a workshop on connecting proxies on environmental change, population dynamics. This is why Arik is here, and he was so kind also to give us a presentation today. I met Arik like 11 years ago at the excavation in Ein Kashish, and it's really like very great to see him again and to continue our work together. He's working at different similar environment to me right now in the Caucasus. So another connection, and I'm really excited to see your talk now. Thank you, Arik.
Thanks, Marika, and thanks everyone for coming. As Marika said, that we met in the Pleistocene, but things are the roads are winding, so it's really nice to be here, and thank you for coming. I will wait a second. Okay, so I'm the talking head of a big group of people that work with us for the past 7 years. First of all, it's all dependent on the Boris Gasparian, our Armenian colleague. You heard the talk before of Andrew Kandel, so without Boris's work in this region cannot be done. It's a big team of people, and more or less we are doing a lot of things that relates to the interlink between people and environment. And this is what I will talk about today, is more or less merging all those lines of evidence to the specific question of the middle upper Paleolithic transitions. And I put the S in the end on purpose. What this project is part of, this lecture is part of the result of our ERC Transcos investigating population dynamics in the Southern Caucasus. I'm from the Hebrew U, and the talk of today I will present more or less our contribution to the long and debate about the middle upper Paleolithic transition. And this is, I start with the most classical kind of starting point that everyone start with Miller's paper from 2004, viewing this transition of the middle to upper as more or less a relay kind of race where one is passing to the other, and with more or less 45, 47 for the starting point in the Holy Land, and from there is distributed throughout Europe. This is a migrationist view. It has reincarnation today with the work of Nicholas Vince and many others that look at the IUP as more or less this kind of a mixture of, let's say, biology, people, tools, and a very sharp transition of migrating population from out of the Levant rather than out of Africa. What I wanted to say is that when you dive into the nitty-gritty details, you see that this is what we know about the slides that are related to this time period, let's say between 50 to 30,000 in the region. And you see that there is, so the colors, just to explain, this is the purplish is a desert belt on the bottom. You have the Mediterranean belt here. You have the desert on the east, and you have the Iranian vegetation on the right. And what you can see more or less is the biases that we have in the distribution of the sites and the known sites. So you have the example of Georgia and the example from Armenia. You have the Zagros. And of course, all those boxes are related to the political situation that we don't talk about. So this is more or less the boxes that we are trapped in when we are trying to create some sort of a narrative for this transition. And I will delve into the Southern Caucasus, but the idea is more or less linking these different boxes into one big box rather than splitting. And it's all based, if you want to start with everything, and we are in Vienna, and my grandfather used to say that he's Austro-Hungarian, although he was 5 when Austro-Hungary ceased to exist, but he was there until he died in 2000 and something. So he was still Austro-Hungarian. So everything starts with the Ottoman Empire. And you can see that this, what we call now borders, are very flexible in historical terms. So just to link 1 second, so what we will discuss today is we will do a zoom in into the Southern Caucasus, and it's a very interesting area to work, more or less because it's very diverse. We have the subtropical area next to the Black Sea. The area that Miraka is working is affected by this area. We have the Caspian Sea, and in between we have continental areas that with the climate, and we have a very different gradients of rugged landscapes that we are talking about. There is very few long-term records of climate. Lake Urmia in Iran of today is going back to 130,000, Lake Van 600,000, and more or less this is, and we have a bit of in the Black Sea that goes back as well, but this is more or less a long-term records, and within it we need to incorporate the archaeological record. Just to give a bit of numbers to the what I just explained about the rugged landscape, this is the landscape of our current Armenia. What we have on the right is the average precipitation, and on the left you have the average of the January temperatures. This is average, and it's minus 27 in the high peaks. So the ones that are low peaks or the low elevation, we are talking about -4. So this is the very landscape that already dictates how hunter-gatherers will move around from high to low elevation, depending on it. There is also a correlation between the precipitation, and I will not exhaust you, that I will show that the vegetation is also related to it, where the northern part of Armenia is alpine meadow and forested, while most of the southern parts, and this is the area that I will talk about today, is almost semi-desert. So just to delve into it, this is another picture, and what I will talk about today is this dot over here, this called Ararat Depression, and this is all the area of the Arax River that you see over here that flows into the Kura and then the Caspian Sea. And we are talking about one cave, and the talk today will be focused on this specific cave and the record from the cave, and I will try to integrate these results with what we know around. We started in 2018 in a survey when we found the site. In 2019, we did a test excavation that was published recently by Jenny Sharif et al. And we worked again in this under the premise of the Transcos ERC in 2 seasons in 2022 and 2023. This is a look to the cave in April, so when it's green. So just to explain what is green. This is not Europe. This is a semi-desert area. So you see the picture from the inside of the cave. This is what you are overlooking at. The cave is situated on a scarp that is looking at 1,500, more or less the highest peak. And what we see is that there is a current floodplain, and this is more or less the location of the cave. And this is why it's really interesting that it's has some very interesting kind of situation when you look at prey, etc., on the lowland. This is a publication of Jenny, and we have a sequence that is ranging between 50,000 to 33,000. Everything that we found there was Middle Paleolithic in character. We have 2 OSL ages on the top, 2 on the bottom, and the main archaeological layer in between it. So the range 35 to 45. And it's a sequence of wind-blown material with the water that is percolating in. And Yanis tomorrow will give a much more refined work on the stratigraphy of the site. And the interesting thing is that we have a lot of roof walls that more or less sealing the material, and you have here one of those blocks from the roof. You see the artifacts lining around below it, and this is how the archaeology look like, more or less, how it's accumulated. It's extremely low density of finds. We have an assemblage of almost 2,000 pieces throughout the 1.5 to 2 meters thick accumulation. It's relatively, or not relatively, it's extremely low density per cubic meter. we have two raw materials at the site. We have the flint that is most likely local with all the reduction sequence, while we have the obsidian that I will speak a bit about the sourcing of it. The obsidian is, when you compare the two raw materials, you see two different worlds. You have the world of the chert, of the flint, where you have all the type of reduction sequence from the cores to the cortical pieces. So we have everything done on site. On the other hand, you have the obsidian that is not locally available. It's not from the daily exploitation territory. And most of it consists of shaping flakes, things that comes when you retouch. And from above of 2 centimeters, we have 36% of the pieces are retouched. So some sort of a very different behavior between the two raw materials. And here is more picture of it. What you see over here on the right, you have different phases of the retouch of the pieces until you have the reduction of the edge again and again and again until discard that you see. The good thing about the obsidian that you have Ellery frames that comes with it, more or less, that Ellery is doing PXRF on the obsidian, on everything, including the pieces that are shutters of 5 millimeters long or something like that. It's a surreal resolution, and each one of those pieces can be originate to a source. And the interesting thing is that you have local sources, if you are relatively local, it's 40, 50 kilometers away. This is Gagasar, Gutanasar, Hatis that are available not through year round. It's above 2000 elevation, the sources. So it means that people need to climb there during certain times of the year. And we have this different sources, and you see the 180 kilometers. This is more or less the farthest that you have. Interestingly enough, you can actually talk about selection because you have the closest are the most dominant one, but you see that there is sources that are coming from 80 kilometers, but they were not chosen like the ones that are coming from 100 and 120. Another thing that needs to be said that we are talking about a straight line. So we are not in Central Europe, so it's not flat. And this is 100 kilometers means more than 150 or 160 kilometers if you walk. So it's a really, really long way that people went. Interestingly enough, you can actually see the ghost of occupation. What I mean, the ghost, the ephemeral occupation at the site is so extremely that you have things that you have only shaping flake. One, it means that someone came to the site, napped, did a tool, brought with him a tool, he resharpened it and went away. And all you have left for you as an archaeologist is this one piece that tells you that this was once existing in the site. And you see that there is places that you have more tools and things that you have only the remnants of the retouch of the pieces. And so this is what I just explained, sorry, that the flint chert is behaving very differently from the obsidian. And we can actually talk about the obsidian. We can actually go into the level of the decision-making of the group of where they exploited the material. The nice thing is that we have a very complicated history of accumulation of bones. We have coprolites, we have carnivores on the top part, and we have things that with cut marks as well. So this is a very continuing picture of what we see from the flint and the obsidian. We have a very ephemeral occupation at the site with not a lot of faunal remains at the site. Interestingly, we have also the work of Paloma Vidal that identified the charcoals, and we can actually talk about the buckthorn that is dominated. So it's the same more or less environment. And the nice thing is that it's continuous. Tomorrow, Dominic, our student, will talk about the microfauna and the herptofauna that shows more or less some sort of stable environment of semi-desert area that we see more or less today. with a difference. Importantly, I want to talk about the age of the site and position it within the starting point of the talk. I wanted to talk about the main archaeological layer is sandwiched between the top part, 33, 35, 36, and the bottom part of it is 45, 44. And we have one charcoal that we dated to 44, and we have 52 on the bottom. The main archaeological horizon where we have refitting and we can show that there is more or less a surface where people were living. It's more or less a meter below surface. And as you can see over here on the right diagram, you have the work of Simon Blockley and Rhys Timms that calculated with an MA student the number of shards that coming from volcanic eruption. And you see the peak over here is specific ones that you can actually correlate this peak to a peak that was found in a Georgian cave called Otvalik Lede, 300 kilometers to the north. And the nice thing about it is that the cave in Otvalik Lede, this is just to put things in order, this is Otvalik Lede, 300 kilometers away. We have Ararat, and we can actually make a linkage between these two sites, not an isochron. It's not like a point in time, but we can, together with the other dating methods, we can actually link the two. And in Otvalik Lede, this is a picture from Vicky Cullen paper in 2021. This is the same tephra that we talked about before. And you see that there is a peak. So wait a second, moment back. So in Otvalik Lede, there is a sequence that continues, that incorporates both middle in layers 5, 6, 7, up to 10. This was a PhD of Dan Adler. And there is a sharp break in the mode of deposition between Unit 5 and Unit 4. Unit 4 already includes Upper Paleolithic material with no in situ change in the material culture. And in the original publication, Dan mentions that the fireplaces of the Upper Paleolithic, of the earliest Upper Paleolithic, are sitting on top of this rubble of Unit 5 of the Middle Paleolithic. There was a big campaign of dating of this layer of this cave. The last one is a paper by Vicky Cullen that added also the tephra. The previous age start of the Upper Paleolithic was 42,000, and now the new dates move it slightly backwards, and they also incorporates the tephra analysis. So the Unit 4 is now dated between 45 to 35, more or less. So and within Unit 4, you see that the peak of the tephra is not in the beginning of it, but in the middle of it, in Unit C. So not on the beginning, but on the middle. And this Unit C is dated by a lot of C14, other methods, TL, etc., to 45 to 35. And the peaks that we see here, Otvalik Lede 4C, this is the peak of the tephra shards. This peak contains the specific shards that we found in Ararat, that coming from the same time period. But importantly, in here, we are talking about Upper Paleolithic per se, while in Ararat, we are talking about the Middle Paleolithic. We are not saying, as we said before, it's not an isochron. It's just saying that there is an overlap, that we can actually show the overlap. This is just to put things in context. You have here the Lake Van as our long-term climatic record, Lake Urmia, and we have the results from Ararat and the one from Otvalik Lede. The green ones are Middle Paleolithic, and we can see that there is a complicated story here rather than a big turnover as it was in the first one. This horrible figure that we did with May meant to show the mass. Instead of showing, so usually people show this kind of graphs with without the standard deviation. What I mean is that you have a point and you say, this is the age of my site, because you want to make a nice story out of it. And then you show more or less a transition between southwest, let's say Sinai, to Georgia on the other extreme, more or less this kind of process. And with May, we took all the ages that are available back then in 2022, and we wanted to show that the black ones are Middle Paleolithic, the red ones are IUP, and the blue ones are Upper Paleolithic. And of course, things can be changed. Of course, for example, there is new dates from Bao Yawan that moved it 2,000 years back, for example, now. Someone just published a new paper. But more or less, this is just to show that the transition that we started with, that there is a big shift, that's one relay race when one transition, one Upper Paleolithic remove all the things, and then there is a sharp replacement of material culture and people. It's extremely complicated with the resolutions that we have. So this kind of a picture of a migrationist picture of one package moving from one place to another is less reasonable. When you look at the comparison with the Levant, with the Middle Paleolithic in the Levant versus the Middle Paleolithic in Armenian highlands, you can see that there is also changes, or there is variation also in the way of life. What I mean by the way of life, you can see that, for example, in the Middle Paleolithic of the Levant, and this is also things that it changed radically in the last 15 years or so, we have different type of sites. We have cave sites that like Amud and Kebara, with extensive occupation over longer periods of time, with very, very confined territories. So this is like the 90% of the material coming from 5 kilometers from the site. When you compare it to the ephemeral occupation of the, for example, Ararat cave, and we have other examples from other cave, we're talking about huge territories of a radius of 200 kilometers. So there seems to be less people over larger territories in, let's say, Armenia, versus more people over smaller territories in the south. And as you can see, also the timing of the transition is surprisingly delayed. And this is also relates to the question of demography or the population dynamics, the words that we are captured by. And this is an extrapolation of the figures that we saw before. And this is, as we called it with May, this is a model. And this is, and I gave the date of today as our starting date of this figure, because if tomorrow something will come out and will refute this figure, I will be the first one to be happy. This is more or less a working hypothesis of 2022. So what we have here is the Levant, the Zagros, the Armenian Highland, and Southern Caucasus. And what we have here is more or less showing the late Middle Paleolithic with the possible transitions that we have, the social processes of transition, not only as a replacement, but sometimes in the Levant, it seems that the IUP is locally developed, and this is highly debated, but this is what I think at least, and May that wrote with me the paper. And it's not a story of a migration or a development from outside, but rather a local development that turns into what will be the early Upper Paleolithic Zakhmarian. The local name is Zakhmarian. And in the Zagros, we have issues with site formation and so on, but it seems that there is some gap. And of course, now will be work from Shanidar that will refute me, and it will be great. In Armenian Highland, I think that we have an overlap a bit with Achitu. They use the same sources, but I don't know if this is overlap due to the fact that we are talking about the standard deviation of the dates or not. This is something that we need to work on. And when you compare it to the our Georgian case study, we can see that there is for sure overlap, as we show with not only with the OSL and the C14, but also with the TEFRA work. Our hope for the future is to work better on the TEFRA in other places. There is now a postdoc that works on the TEFRA in Lake Van from Potsdam that I think will change a lot of what we are saying now. And this is also a work in progress. I think that the work in progress is a word that came back again and again. So what we aim to do in the future is to more or less bridge what we are doing in our workshop. And we want to, so all of us, both people that talk about the material culture and both about people that talk about biology in the pure sense of it, we're all talking about demographic as our interpretive framework. We all use the same vocabulary, but meaning very different things. When we are talking about the cultural evolution, we're talking about information networks, and what we are discussing more or less that we are believing, or some of us believe, that the material culture is reflecting social processes of learning, and we can actually talk about traits that are bounded in place and time. And the same goes more or less with metapopulations that are, it's not independent populations, they are all interlinked to each other. And they are all related to the fact that we need effective population to survive. And when we take this question or this perspective into the material culture, we need to think about the questions that are challenging now. What is a process that creates the differences in the same time between regions? And we can see it in the life ways, not only in the material culture. And what are the processes that maintain those cultural differences, and what are the ones that are enable to things to merge into one and the other. So although we are talking about coarse grain, time and space resolution, we can actually see differences in the way people are living. And this is more or less the aim of the project that we are dealing with. In 19th of May, we will meet in the University of Toledo in Spain to discuss the results of the group of everyone. We are around 30 people that will have to say something about it, the project. And this, as always, instead of conclusion where we would like to be, we hope that this meeting will yield a special issue in QSR. And the idea is to put all the lines of evidence that relates to what I show over here. This is 160 kilometers. This is our logo, is 160 kilometers of the transect of the region. So we want to link the people with the landscape and how the landscape changed and how it relates to their decision making. And not only in our 160 kilometers that we are responsible for, but to link it to other regions with more precise numbers, with more data that can actually enable us to compare between regions. And not only to say that it's different or not different, but to go back to the aim of archaeology is the behavior and to see the life ways that are changing between the region. And of course, it always relates to the refined climate, ecological, and so on and so on. And this is what we are trying to do with multiple lines of evidence. And I hope in a year's time you can actually read it, not only hear me saying it. So again, thank you for listening. This is my spiel.